Hello and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. In today's talk, I was going to cover the concept of Parivartana Yoga, or exchange of houses, as it relates to Vedic astrology or Jyotish. So let's go ahead. Just a note before we talk about the concept, I have a bunch of teaching videos on Vedic astrology or Jyotish. You can find them all in my concepts playlist. To really get the most out of this talk, I would suggest watching the following videos beforehand. Otherwise, you might get lost. They are one, the North, South, and East Indian style charts, so you can help navigate your way through this. I also have the Introduction to Navigating a Birth Chart, which also helps with general navigation. Also, Introduction to the Constellations or Rashis. That's going to be critical for knowing the rulerships of the different constellations, and the Lagna, also known as the Ascendant rising sign of first house, because that's how we orient all of our charts. All right, so what is Parivartana? It's a fairly simple concept and it's actually fairly common, so it's a useful thing to know about if you're looking at yours or other people's charts. But the idea here is that technically what it is when you have a planet in a house ruled by another planet, and the ruler is in a constellation ruled by the first planet. Yeah, so the first planet is in a house ruled by another planet, and then the second planet is in the house ruled by the first planet. So we call this an exchange of houses. And if you haven't heard it before, this is what we call a graha yoga. In Sanskrit, that means a planetary combination. So when you have certain planetary combinations, it's like another layer of significance added to the chart. So this Parivartana concept, first of all, it can occur for all planets in the natal chart except for Rahu Ketu. Um, it can occur for all planets in all the subcharts, subzodiacs, and amshas, including Rahu Ketu. So in the natal chart, I don't use this, but in the subcharts, I do use an exchange with Rahu and Ketu. And again, you can get all the rulerships and ownerships and stuff like that of the different constellations in my previous video on Introduction to the Constellations or Rashis. Also with this, so what you can do, if there is an exchange of houses, you can literally visualize these planets switching places, and then you can reanalyze the chart. Yeah. Um, and so you'll bring the planet that's in exchange. Well, the other thing about it that's important is that the other thing is that if a planet is in exchange, that usually also means, not always, but usually it means that that planet has more influence over the whole chart. Because unless it's switching places with the planet directly across from it, that means that the planet will be aspecting at least two other additional houses to its original position, sometimes more, especially if it's an outer planet like Mars or Jupiter or Saturn, because Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn have additional aspects or places in which they shine their light. So, what does this do? Well, one, it strengthens both planets because if you bring a planet into its own house, that's one of the strongest positions it can be in, and we call it swap position. But the thing is, when planets get strong, that's not always good. Strong planets can be great. They can really improve things. They can also really bring things down. So for better or worse, the planets that do the exchange are strengthened. Um, this can usually mean, often mean, not always, often mean that the inanimate meanings of the houses are protected. Um, But this may mean that the living beings that the houses represent, we call the living symbol a jiva karaka. So houses and planets and things can represent not only inanimate things but animate things. So like Jupiter, for example, can represent finance and banks, so inanimate things, but it can represent children. So for Jupiter as a jiva karaka, it represents children. Okay. The other thing, besides not necessarily protecting living beings, it may not protect the person or people being assessed on a medical basis because it's sort of an extension of a living being, right? The other thing to know is that when there is a exchange of houses, that can often mean that there's actually a tension between the meanings of the two houses that are exchanged. So, for example, if you're doing an exchange between the second house and the fourth house, the second house can represent things like, family, and the fourth house can represent kind of higher education, but at the level of like college, not necessarily like a PhD. But and the second house can also represent savings. So if there's an exchange of houses between the second house and the fourth house, that may mean that there's tension between the family and going to college, or it might drain your savings. You might end up draining your savings to go to college, or it's going to, impact your savings to go to college. So that's how you can kind of weave that into the interpretation. Um, and as I mentioned, Parivartanas are fairly common. They're not that hard to find, at least one in a chart. More rare is two, and very rare is three. I think the only chart I've seen that has three Parivartanas is Indira Gandhi's chart, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So anyway, I set up a mock chart here with planets in different places, and we can go through. So if we start at the top in the Lagna, you can see that Rahu and Saturn are here. This Lagna is ruled by Gemini, the third constellation of the zodiac, and Gemini is ruled by Mercury. So where's Mercury in this chart? Well, Mercury's in the ninth house, but 11th constellation of Aquarius, and Aquarius is ruled by Saturn. So if we're just assuming this is a natal chart, basically Saturn is in a constellation ruled by Mercury, and Mercury is in a constellation ruled by Saturn. So you can exchange Saturn and Mercury in this chart. You have an exchange between the third house and the ninth house. Yeah. So again, if there's a tension here, the first house usually represents the individual that we're analyzing. The ninth house can represent things like father, can represent things like authority, can represent things like religion. So there might be a tension here between the person and their father. It can also the ninth house can also represent government, the person and government, person and authority generally, the person and religion, for example. Okay. So if this was a subchart, and Rahu was in this position, Rahu, again, only in the subcharts do I use this. Rahu owns or rules Aquarius also. And Rahu is in a constellation ruled by Mercury. Mercury is in Aquarius, which in a subzodiac, subchart, Amsha, these are all different words for the same thing. Mercury is in a sign ruled or owned by Rahu. So in a subchart, you can actually exchange Rahu and Mercury. Got it? Okay. So then if we move on to the second house, you have Jupiter in Cancer. Cancer is ruled by the moon. And the moon, so where's the moon? The moon is in Pisces, which is ruled by Jupiter. So again, in this chart, you can get a Parivartana exchange of houses between Jupiter and moon. And we keep going into the third house here. We have Venus in Leo. Leo is owned by the sun. Where's the sun? Sun is in Taurus, which is owned by Venus. So you can get exchange here between Venus and sun. So in this chart mock-up that I made up, the only planets not in Parivartana are Ketu and Mars. Yeah, I mean, it's hard, I think, in the natal chart because Rahu and Ketu are always 180 degrees away from each other. Maybe in a subchart, it would be easier to get all the planets. That's what I was trying to do. I was trying to see if I could actually get all the planets in Parivartana. I think it's pretty tough to logistically do it, let alone like sort of, win the lottery, so to speak, in terms of, all your planets in Parivartana. That would be pretty amazing. And probably really intense for the person, whoever's chart that is. So there you have it. That's Parivartana Yoga. That's how you identify it, what it means, and how you weave that into interpretation of the whole chart. So as always, I want to thank you for your time. I appreciate your interest in this video and my channel and Vedic Astrology or Jyotish generally. All of your support is appreciated. And I hope you found this video helpful, interesting, and useful as you navigate the energy cycles of your life. Until the next one, take care. Namaste.